Hey everyone, so today's a big day, at least for me, because we are recording the final chapter of my real estate investing 101 class or whatever course, whatever you want to call it. Again, it was important for me to create this because I believe there's a lot of material out there for real estate investing. I think there's a lot of people trying to sell stuff where, I firmly believe the sort of basics need to just be given away. So it was frankly harder than I thought it was going to be, right? Trying to create what I think is a 101 level, try to break it up into different chapters, try to focus on creating the content and the like. So I think it took start to finish 6 weeks to do that, creating content sort of a chapter at a time. So in the end, here's the final chapter. And I'd love to hear what you all think. If anybody's gone through all 6 chapters, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, leave comments, ask questions, tell me what I missed, whatever that happens to be. So let's get started. But before we do that, please remember that it's important for you to subscribe to the channel, help grow the channel by sharing it with your friends and family, as it's my sort of tracker to see how we're doing. We're approaching 600 subscribers. I think we're at 588 this morning. So thankful for that. Hit the like button. It always helps me understand which videos I hit the mark on, which ones I don't. So it's again a way to communicate. And if you are leaving a comment, know that I'm a one-man show. I don't and likely never will have a team, so it's just me. So when you leave a comment and you see a response, that is coming from me. So let's get started. So this video is going to be about how to exit real estate investing. So we started with kind of establishing your goals, finding your weaknesses, then we went into understanding financing, tried to figure out where we went from there. But now I thought we'd close with, what happens when you want to get out? So we'll talk about that. So obviously you can sell it, right? If you're doing the affordable housing, there's affordable rentals as I talk about. You're lucky because you have kind of multiple exits. You can sell to an investor or sell to an owner occupant. You can exchange. We talked a little bit about that in the last section. But we'll sort of approach that here and talk about and give some examples behind that. We can always refinance, right? Maybe you're thinking about selling, but it's not because you want to sell, but it's because you think it's your only option to raise cash. So we'll talk about that. And then again, we'll talk about what happens when you pass on, what happens to the real estate you have and things of that nature. All right, so selling real estate. So first and foremost, to be clear, I don't recommend selling real estate investments. Right? If you follow my model, we talk about buy and hold, but we talk about conservative financing, and then we talk about long-term. Selling sort of puts a final stop to that, right? It's not why you sort of get in this game, right? You get in this game to let time help you, right? I promise you, it's not going to feel like much is happening the first 3 to 5 years, and then years 5 through 10, it's going to feel a little bit better. And then years 10 through wherever, it's going to feel great. So you got to get in it. You got to stay in it. I know there will be some bumps in the road. It always happens. Remember, buy and hold, sort of underlining, capitalizing hold in that is the model that you're following. If you've chosen to invest your time in listening to anyone and you're listening to me, buying is one thing, but the hold is the important word in the buy and hold strategy. So why do I say that? Well, let's be real, right? Selling is a taxable event. Selling your real estate investment means you're going to pay taxes in most cases. It also means if you've held them for any length of time, you're going to do something that's called depreciation recapture. It is essentially paying back the government, right? The depreciation is not as a non-cash expense, which most real estate investors love. In fact, I've done a video on it by itself. But if you sell, you've got to pay it back, right? So depreciation, simply said, if you have an asset that's worth $100,000 and you're depreciating it $3,000 a year and you've had it for 10 years, you're going to sell that. Your cost basis is 10 times 3 because you owned it 10 years, so $30,000. You take $30,000 minus the 100, and your cost basis is $70,000. So you're going to pay even more taxes than you think you're going to pay, right? Most of you probably think if you bought it for 100 and sell it for 200 10 years later, you're going to just pay taxes on the 100. Nope. Sorry to burst your bubble. You're going to pay taxes on 130 grand because you have to pay back that depreciation. So it hurts. And last, another one is there's better ways to extract cash from real estate, right? If you're selling because you just need cash, there are other ways you can go get that cash or reposition equity. And then again, obviously selling stops the whole mortgage pay down by the tenants. It stops the tenants from buying your asset. You stop the appreciation cycle. You stop inflation in rents. It's just, again, selling is not a great idea, right? If you're just selling to raise cash for something, hopefully you've heard by now that you're getting off the buy and hold process and not something that I recommend. So hopefully that is clear. So next we're going to talk about exchanging, the like kind exchange, rental for rental. It's also generally referred to as a 1031 exchange. So what is this, right? It's a way for you to move equity from property A to property B. Maybe it'll be in a cycle where houses get super expensive, like we experienced in 2008. And you're like, nope, this is crazy. The houses shouldn't be this much expensive. It's fake. So sell the houses, go through an exchange, and move that equity into small apartment buildings. It's a great approach, one we fully support. Some people now are looking at California going, oh my God, it's going to fall into the Pacific Ocean in the next earthquake or, whatever. And I want to move my equity from California to Texas or California to Florida or California to Tennessee or, whatever, right? Or maybe Tennessee to California. I don't know. That's absolutely possible, right? A 1031 exchange is a vehicle, a tool, something the IRS gives you so you can continually being an active investor and moving your equity where it makes sense, and absolutely can make sense. I think leaving something untouched or at least unreviewed for 30 years is probably a mistake. Should always be looking at your portfolio, making sure it's performing. And again, as you probably guessed, I don't mean selling it, but maybe you do. Maybe there are times where an exchange makes sense. Another one you can do is you can use an exchange to add units, right? Think about it, right? You own something for 10 years, you sell it, it's doubled in price. You can take all of that equity and go from one house to a 10-unit apartment building, right? And then once you start adding units and those start to cash flow and you start to get inflation and you start to get rent increases, it becomes the little stream turns into a raging river, and it's a lot of fun. And the most important part of that is you're doing that by not adding any more capital, right? You're not writing a personal check. You're taking the equity from, investment A and moving it into investment B. When you do that, when you go bigger, which is a requirement of a 1031 exchange, the thing you're purchasing has to be bigger than the thing you're selling. Your depreciation base gets bigger, right? So if you own something, you start depreciating it down, as we talked about in that depreciation video. If it's a house, I think it's 27.5 years, residential 27.5 years, and commercial was 39 years, I think. Whatever it is, go back, watch that video. But again, you can increase the base, and then the depreciation is that magic. And again, we sort of did some math in that depreciation video because it's often not well understood by the average or beginning investor, but depreciation is something that is wonderful to understand and leverage as a real estate investor. Again, it's a way to reposition your equity without paying taxes, right? If this was a stock market, think about this. All right, you could sell, I don't know, General Electric, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, and move all of that, profit. I don't know where they were 10 years ago, but I'm sure it was higher than today. And maybe sell GE and reposition into Amazon. Wouldn't you love to have done that, right? Given where GE went in the decade and given where Amazon went in the decade. You can't do that in the stock market. Selling GE is a taxable event. There's no way to get that 30 or 40 or 15 or whatever percent back. However, with real estate, you can. They're not going to take their cut. So you can use what would be tax money levered into more real estate. It's amazing when you figure out what an exchange can do for you. And again, if it's not obvious, it's a way for you to increase your asset base, increase your your income statement, balance sheet without having to pay the IRS. Please understand, I'm not one of those people talking about not paying the IRS or any of that. I'm happy to pay the IRS whatever I legally own, but I don't want to pay any more than I legally own, if you know what I mean. So what about refinancing, right? This is something I don't think a lot of new investors understand or appreciate because they've kind of lived in a buy-sell world of investments. I either buy investments or sell investments. I guess I would ask you, do you know what a cash out refinance is? A cash out refinance. So this was pretty popular back in 08, 09. It was pretty popular actually by owner occupants. They would go get an equity line, which is what most people do instead of a cash out refi. They get an equity line, which is very common on an owner occupant. Not so much on rentals. It's a little common, but what's more common on rentals is called a cash out refinance. And we'll do the math here in a minute. So here we go. Let's just do the math. And this is an investment property, not an owner occupant property. Let's say you own a property today that's worth 200 grand. Let's say, again, for easy math, you owe 100. Let's say your bank will do a 75% loan on that rental property. So you take 75% times 200 and you get 150 grand. If you're going to do that loan, what will happen is that loan will pay off your first 100K because you still owe that. And then you will get a check for 50 grand. Now, yes, I understand there's transaction costs and all of those things, but let's just keep it simple. A cash out refinance allows you as a borrower to take cash out of your rental property, recast the debt. So if you owned it for 10 years and you only had 20 years left, it'll start a 30-year cycle all over again. The interest rate will be different, all these things. But it is a way for you to extract cash. So 2 questions. First, is that 50K taxable? What do you think? Right? You got your asset gave you 50 grand. What happens in the stocks or bonds when they give you 50 grand? Well, it's counted as income, right? And the income's taxed always. Good news. This 50 grand is not considered income. This 50 grand is considered a loan, and loans are not taxable. So that 50 grand goes right in the bank account and is usable. Now, please, if you understand our story, don't do something stupid. Don't go out and buy a car. Don't do a $50,000 trip. Don't buy a watch. Don't buy whatever. Use that 50 grand to increase your foundation, increase your real estate portfolio. Do the right things. Upgrade the inventory you have in the projects that you have. Lastly, I have to point out, because I made this mistake, don't buy or create being the important word in this story, alligator properties. I think it was video number 3 way back when, where I did a whole video on creating alligators. An alligator property, quite simply, is one that consumes money every month regardless of what happens. That is a bad idea. I did that once during a refinance, and it was horrible. I could not wait to sell that property because every month I knew I was going to have to write a check that was $200, $300, $400, $500 bigger than the money that property was bringing in. I'll never do that again. Don't do that. That's bad. So in essence, if you could walk away with 50 grand, but you've created an alligator, don't do it. Maybe take 30 grand. Maybe take 20 grand. Whatever you can do to make sure that property is not turning into an alligator. Don't just take the money because the bank's going to loan it to you. So last one, right? There's a story out there that says you can't escape 2 things, death and taxes. Well, that's kind of true when you think about real estate, but kind of not true. Turns out with real estate, when you pass on, which unfortunately is the one that we all can't escape, there's something interesting that happens to our real estate portfolio when it goes to our heirs. Turns out your real estate is reevaluated and given what's called a stepped up basis. So we're going to go through an example. Again, let's do the math. Let's say you own a property that's worth 500 grand when you pass on. Let's say 40 years ago, you bought it for 100 grand. You've owned it for 40 years, so you've obviously depreciated that property to 0. It now has a cost basis of 0. If you sold that the day before you died, you would owe taxes on $500,000 because you've depreciated that asset to 0, and then you've sold it for 500 grand. So that's all profit. That's why a lot of people who've owned property for decades don't sell. They just wait to pass on, and it goes through their heirs. So what happens when you pass on, right? You didn't sell. You have that asset at your death. Well, it turns out that the IRS, the government, whoever you want to say, has created rules that asset is not passed on to your heirs at 0. Think about that. You're 99 years old. You've owned an asset nearly half your life. It's depreciated to 0. You pass on. You give it to your I don't know, grandchildren perhaps, or great grandchildren, I don't know. And they're given that asset at 500 grand so that the whole depreciation cycle starts again. Their cost basis is 500 grand. They could sell it at 500 grand and pay no taxes. It's a great thing, right? So this stepped up basis when you pass on is a great loophole for real estate and real estate people who own real estate. So that kind of completes the 6th chapter. I thought we would start with, chapter 1 was about goals and understanding weakness. And I thought chapter 6 should always be about how to get out, how to exit, what do I think about the different ways to extract equity, things of that nature. Because I think as you do this for years and decades, there will be times where you need to raise cash. And I wanted all of you to understand that selling is not your only option. So in the end, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, like button, leave a comment if you have a question or concern. This completes the 6 chapters. I think we're at 90 minutes or so in total, which is right around where I wanted to be. I want to thank you for the opportunity to create this. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope to see hundreds and thousands of you watch these 6 videos. It'll let me know that I did the right thing. Take care.